All right. All right. Hi, I'm Frank McChrystal, and what is your name?
My name is Robert Stone. I'm a captain, U.S. Navy, retired.
All right. Where did you grow up?
Grew up in Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, before I went to the Navy.
When did you join the service?
I joined the service in September of 1942 at the University of Minnesota. I was in a officer program there. And then I went from there to after a year, to the Naval Academy and was commissioned in 1946. And
All right. Why did you pick the Navy?
my dad asked me what I was going to do when I got out of high school. World War II had not started. I said thought I'd be an engineer, go to the University of Minnesota and study there. And he said if he had it to do all over again, he would have gone to one of the service academies. And I said, what's that? And my dad says, the library's right down the street. Why don't you find out? So down I went, read everything I could, and I came back all excited. And he said, well, what did you find out? And I said, well, there are two academies at that time, the Army and the Navy, West Point and Annapolis. And he said, well, tell me about it. How do you get in? And I said, well, you should have had all of these courses in high school. No woodworking, no volleyball, no dancing, none of that, hardcore subjects. And I said, you know, I've had all those subjects. And he said, isn't that strange? So he'd planned my curriculum unbeknownst to me, and they planned my going to, he said, I don't care where you go as long as it's the Naval Academy. So I had to take qualification exam and an entrance examination, 2 exams. In between, I told my dad I'm not going to pass the entrance exam unless I get some help. So he says, well, what are you thinking about? And I said, going to a prep school, but I'm in high school. And he said, well, go see the principal. He's a good guy. So I went to the principal, and he said, that's great. We'll do math. First period we'll do math, and the second period we'll do chemistry or physics. And then you got to promise me you'll study everything else, and I'll let you go to prep school the rest of the day and night. So I went to school from early morning till most of the time 10 o'clock at night. And with that, I was supposed to study not only my prep school work, but my high school work and the high school classes. I never went to English. I never went to history. The best part of that was both teachers gave me an A and said they were glad that I was doing what I was doing.
Well, after the academy, what conflicts did you take part in?
Really nothing. The first time I was on a aircraft carrier ship's company, and we did a peacekeeping tour in 1946 and 1947. We went around the world. The second fracas, the Korean War, I was assigned to a top secret job in nuclear weapons, and that kept me out of the Korean War because we weren't ready to use nuclear weapons at that. Things that went on in the Mediterranean, the things that went on in Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was involved in all of that. Most of my flying career was in anti-submarine warfare. I have over 5,000 hours of flying time. I have over 500 hours of carrier landings, which more than a third of them are at night. I flew off every aircraft carrier in the Atlantic Fleet. I had command of an anti-submarine squadron, aircraft squadron. After that, I had command of an air group, which means all of the aircraft on the aircraft carrier came under my command. I was executive officer of an aircraft carrier. I had command of a naval air station in Italy. And after 1976, I retired and worked for the Navy as an anti-submarine warfare operational analyst, and did that for another 14 years. So really, I worked for the Navy for 48 years.
Wow. During some of these air missions, was it always clear what the objective was?
Oh yes. That you train for what you know what the policy is. You train for it. Having command of the units that I did, I had to see to that my both officer and enlisted crewmen were well qualified, which we won a lot of awards, so they were.
What type of planes did you fly?
I flew a total of 38 different military aircraft during my career, and I count one of those 38 as 2 weeks training in a blimp, flying it around. But I started out on an aircraft carrier saying, I want to go to flight training, but I don't want to kill myself like all these guys are doing. So I went into patrol planes, flew several different types of patrol planes. And my second tour of duty was flying what they called heavy attack, the largest bombers that they could get on an aircraft carrier, and flying off a straight deck carrier, the wingtips, or over the edge of the flight deck. And it was an aircraft that had 2 huge reciprocating engines and 1 jet. And you had to land like on a postage stamp of an aircraft carrier. Then from there on, I went into anti-submarine warfare aircraft, flying those. And when I had the air command of the air group, I had to fly all the airplanes on the carrier. So some of them I didn't fly very well, but I did it.
Were there ever any problems landing on the carriers?
No landings on a carrier. My only problem one time was down in Sanford, Florida, flying the big bombers. I was making night touch and goes. The airplane was huge, but it only had 1 pilot. And my right wing stalled out and I started to cartwheel. I got the aircraft back down on the deck, blew all the tires, and the runway was 144 feet too short. That's because my airplane ended up nose down in a ditch and you couldn't see the cockpit. The next day my wife had to go on the base and my children were with her, and one of them, the youngest one, said, "Mommy, there's Daddy's aircraft." She about drove off the road there, trying to keep the car straight, as she looked at my airplane half buried in the ground in this ditch. But that's the only close one I've had. Some night scary landings though.
What did you miss from home the most?
What did I miss? Being with my family. Now the people are complaining about being gone for 15 months to over in Iraq and that. Twice I was on a 9-month deployment, came home and was home for 1 week and went back out on a 6-month deployment. I did that twice. I had 6 straight years of sea duty a couple of times, where deployments kept me most of the time away from home. And not seeing like boys wrestle and play football was the toughest part.
What specific details do you remember about combat, sights, sounds, and what you saw?
The only real combat I was involved in was a Cuban Missile Crisis, where we monitored the ships and photographed them and tracked them of those arriving in Cuba. Also the submarine forces, the Russians that were there. 2 of my squadron airplanes came back with bullet holes in them, but that's as close as we got involved. Most of my anti-submarine warfare work was in the Mediterranean, where we kept positive contact on every submarine that the Soviets had running around in there.
Would the Soviets, would they always have a submarine, at least one submarine in the Mediterranean?
No, they always had at least 6 or 8 of them in the Mediterranean.
Would they all attack submarines, or were they the nuclear ballistic submarines?
They were both.
Both?
Originally, they were always attack, but then as they got the nuclear ballistic ones, they had those over there too.
Would they come through the Strait of Gibraltar?
Strait of Gibraltar. We have what we call a SOSA system that's set up on land things, and these are hydrophones on long cables, and we also have them in the United States. And they listen, and with 2 or 3 stations listening, they can fairly well pinpoint where an prospective enemy submarine is and what his track is. They'd vector us out to these, and we'd get on top of them, follow them around, play games with them.
Yeah.
Do you think they knew do they think they knew you were there?
They did. We had some small detonator, little charges that we used in training, and occasionally we'd drop a few of those over the submarine to let them know we were there.
And how long do those air missions last?
I beg pardon?
How long would you stay out in your plane following those submarines around?
In the plane, normally they were 4 to 6 hours in the prop planes we were in. The time was determined by the cycle of the rest of the jet aircraft. When I was flying the heavy attack airplanes, we'd launch in the morning, and because we were so big, the captain would say, "I don't want to see it till dark." And so we'd go out and fly all day, 8 hours, something like that.
Did you ever see any Russian planes?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. What was that like?
They were down in off Cuba, and they were also in the Mediterranean. They'd make passes, but they made sure that they didn't come too close to us. But they had a few of them out there, not more submarines and surface ships than they did aircraft. Yeah.
Were there American submarines?
In the Mediterranean?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or,
There was actually a squadron of submarine station in Naples, Italy, and they also had them up in Holy Loch in Scotland.
do you know what they were doing during this time?
I beg pardon?
Do you know what they were doing during this time?
Yes, because when I was in Italy, one of my shore duty jobs, I had the OPCON, the operational control station for the whole Mediterranean, and we felt that we knew where they were all at and what they were all doing. Every once in a while we'd lose them, but normally we could keep track of them.
Do you remember the most chaotic moment of your service?
Chaotic moment? I guess I was on a night flight, and once again in the heavy bombers. And we had one more operational mission to run. And we had only 4 aircraft aboard the carrier. That's as many as they could carry of us because we were so big. And it wasn't my turn to fly. It was the officer in charge was crew 4. I was crew 14. And from when I first looked at the assignment board, I went from seeing a 4 up there till somebody put a 1 in front of it. And off I went, the only aircraft off the carrier. And a big thunderstorm came up, and I said, if you guys keep running like you're going to be in the worst storm I've ever seen. They said, Roger, which meant, we understand. And they said, your signal is Charlie, which means you're cleared to land, there's a clear deck. And I said, no, I'm going to Italy, I'll see you in a couple days. You guys are right in the middle of a storm. And they said, just try to make a pass down, and I did. And the landing signal officer at that time was a controller where they didn't have what they called the forensic lens, which you see, now they say, call a ball when you see it in the center of a screen. And it's all done by lights. But the landing signal officer talked me down, and just as I got ready to come across the stern of the aircraft carrier, they called foul deck, which meant they hadn't cleared the airplanes out of the way for my landing. So again I said, that's it, goodbye, I'll see you in 2 days. The captain got on the radio and instead of calling me by my rank and name, it was Bob. Come on, Bob, you can do it. One more pass. And they talked me down again, and I don't know how I made it, but I did. And there's one of the qualifications you get is an instrument card. The highest honor on the instrument card is you're supposed to be able to land in any weather. So they had a presentation and tried to give me my green card for making the landing and not crashing the airplane.
After the war, what was the easiest part of the war to put behind you?
The easiest part to put behind me? Well, the fact that I was only involved in one situation. The rest of the time was primarily surveillance. And I ended up really being quite active operationally all my career. So I really didn't have a lot to put behind me. It was all fairly well balanced out. Yeah.
Is there one mission you always remember?
One mission?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that landing I just described, one of the missions where I have the picture, we usually flew in pairs on a submarine, and we forced the diesel submarine to expend his battery, and he had to surface. And one of our PAO photographs is my plane with the boom out to check when we flew over him. And the crew captioned that madman, which is the signal that we got a contact. Madman, damn it, madman. And you can see me sitting right over, less than 100 feet over the top of a Soviet submarine. That's,
Did they have to surface all, like, get the was it the conning tower? Is that what they call it? Did they have to surface the entire conning tower?
Normally,
Again?
you can see the periscope, and normally they came all the way up on the surface.
Yeah.
Well, once we got them, the nuclear ones, though, never surfaced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you serve with anybody you think you'll remember?
Huh?
Did you serve with anybody special?
Of memory?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think all of my admirals were pretty impressive. The one man had 2 tours in Washington D.C. One of them in anti-submarine warfare, and one of them I ran determined the curriculum and was in charge of all the factory training for the Polaris missile program. I set up the first course and sat in with the first crew of the George Washington, their first Polaris nuclear submarine. But I don't know, I had some good tours. It's just that I was gone so much at the time. I ended up my last 5 years of service with duty in Italy, where I was the chief of staff for the Anti-Submarine Warfare Command, and then commanding officer of the air station in Naples. Yeah.
What is life like on an aircraft carrier?
Busy.
Busy.
Aircraft carriers are normally conditioned and manned to fly, or especially the smaller ones, the anti-submarine warfare ones, fly around the clock, 24 hours, day in and day out. And the poor crewmen, you see them whenever they get a break. The guys that handle the aircraft and the maintenance and all that, wherever they sit down, they fall asleep. It's dangerous up on the flight deck. They have to know what they're doing. They have to be trained. They look after each other. And I'd say that's the busiest part.
Which aircraft carrier were you the XO of?
The Essex.
The Essex?
Yeah.
What were your responsibilities being the XO on an aircraft carrier?
First of all, everything but the operation of the ship. The captain had the conning of the ship. I had the cleanliness of all the spaces. I had the efficiency of all the departments, gunnery, aviation, supply, everything like that. I also had the responsibility in case any of the people got into trouble not doing their job or disobeying some of the rules, that I was the one that determined whether I could give them certain punishments or restrict them, or I had to go to the captain, and then I recommended the captain what I thought he should do. Normally he did that. The other responsibility, I was also his backup for conning the ship, particularly in replenishment, where you pull alongside another ship. I normally did that for the captain. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
But I had 2 other jobs. One, I was a gunnery officer before I went to aviation. The other, I was assistant air operations officer on a carrier.
Okay. So when you started flying, were you designated as a pilot for whatever squadron? I'm not sure how the Navy breaks up the planes on each aircraft carrier, but when you started doing that, did you have to work your way up? Became a pilot of I don't know, a Phantom. I'm just pulling things out of my head. But how did that work when you became a pilot?
The planes I flew were all multi-engine.
Okay.
All but one of the airplanes, the big bomber, were 2 pilots.
Okay.
After your first tour, you have enough seniority and it's number of hours in the aircraft doing something. The first squadron I went into, the patrol squadron, I was almost at the end of my tour of duty before I made plane commander. So I was training the whole time. When I went into the large bombers, I had to go through a training session to learn all about it because there was only one pilot. There was no one else that could take over in case you had troubles. So it's a training thing. When I went into the third type of squadron, I went down to Key West and I was there 4 months learning about the airplane, the tactics and all that. And then you become a plane commander. Some of the junior officers, it takes them a whole tour of duty to become a plane commander. But the more senior you get, the faster you qualify.
Well, I don't think a lot of people know about, even people my age know about, is during the Cold War, how dangerous and how important the submarine war was between the United States and the Soviets, meaning it was really a big part of what was going on, and nobody really knew about it. Is there anything you'd like to, explain about how the submarine warfare really was important?
It was extremely important. The submarine commands were large. They were varied. You had the surface ships, you had the submarines, you had the aircraft carriers that were designated anti-submarine. You had a capability on the bigger carriers of protecting the ships from submarine attacks. So it's let up now quite a bit. The carrier-based ASW squadrons are being decommissioned quite regularly, 1 a year, 2 a year, 3 a year now. So except for patrol planes and helicopters, the rest of the anti-submarine warfare air force is out of business.
Okay. Did during the late '80s, I guess the late '70s through the '80s, was the cat and mouse games with the Soviets? Was it all? Were you always on a high alert level, or was it? Did you have this respect with the Soviets that you guys kind of knew you were both kind of training with each other or against each other?
The only time that I was involved in anything other than operations which did all what you were saying was when we were off the coast of Israel and Lebanon, and we had quite a bit of activity with Soviet ships and airplanes and submarines. Then we were on a higher state, but you can only stay so long in peacetime. Yes, there are the alerts, and you practice. The general quarters is the term they use going to.
Did you, because I've heard stories of submarines, chasing submarines, like U.S., shadowing Soviet submarines and vice versa. And then, they kind of knew that each other were there, even though they were training, and they were the enemies, that there was a kind of a respect between the United States and the Soviet Union at that time, that the captains of the vessels, or the people that were the admirals that were in charge took it seriously, but it was kind of a game to them in a sense. It was really a very dangerous game, but nonetheless they knew that there was a kind of a mutual respect between the Soviets and the U.S.
Our submarines hoped that the Soviets didn't know that they were there.
Yeah.
And whether they did or not, I suspect some of them did, and I know a lot of them did not know that their forces were there. What nobody ever discussed or talked about the probability of being detected, and that the submariners knew what their probability was, but the rest of the world did not.
When I was Frank's age, there was the Cold War was still going on, and my father was a career Marine, and he would get all this publications, and he by the time he retired, he was high up in the officer ranks, and he would get all these things about the Soviet military. You know, it was still a big deal. There was still a big force.
Oh yeah.
Before the wall fell. But it was such a big deal to get a photograph of a nuclear Soviet submarine. Was that the kind of like the pinnacle of what you guys were going for? Was trying to get all the like getting a picture of one of these?
Well, we were pretty happy when we got one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, that's fascinating.
A lot of times, they knew they can hear you if you're down low flying over them. They have a capability of knowing you there, and they have tactics that they try to get away, and we have tactics that we try to keep them in a containment.
Okay. I mean, in your opinion, do you think at that time, before, at the zenith, or when the technology of the Soviets was the best, do you think the Soviet submarines were superior to the U.S. submarines?
I don't think so.
So at that time, it was the Los Angeles class submarine weren't they the top dogs in the U.S.?
And the attack
The attack.
business.
And then I can't remember the Soviet submarines, the attack submarines,
But they had a lot of them, and that's why we still have a capability. There are other countries that have submarines too,
okay.
and so they haven't given up on them. But there's so many things going on now that even you read about the sailors who joined the Navy to be in the Navy, or a lot of them are doing groundwork now with the Marines and the Army. Yeah.
Is there anything you'd want to let this generation know about the Cold War and the you know the what was going on with the submarine warfare during the Cold War? Is there anything that you could add?
No, there are a few books. Some of them are fiction, some of them are nonfiction, but they give you a general idea if someone wants to read about submarines.
Okay. Did you think the Hunt for Red October was close at all to what?
It was pretty close. Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So there were a lot of fiction stuff in it.
Yeah.
Had to make it interesting.
Okay. Because I remember, you know, those books came out when I was in high school, and I remember reading that one first, and then, you know, the Red Storm Rising. I don't know if you read that one.
Yeah.
Also, that was a little bit of submarine warfare. Trying to think what else I wanted to ask you. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, I have some of my father's friends were in Key West as a Marine, getting ready to embark and get ready. Since you were in the middle of all that, did you really think it was going to escalate to a full-blown war with Cuba?
The information that I had, I don't know.
Okay.
We were given a job to do certain things, and it was close. They sent some troops in, you know, and they. If your dad was he in Guantanamo too? And
No, my father wasn't down there at the time. I think, what year did that go on?
62, 63.
62. He took part in the Dominican Republic invasion of the Dominican Republic sometime around that. But he didn't, for some reason or another, he didn't take part in that. But like contemporaries of his, my neighbor at one time was in Key West and getting ready to, on alert.
Yeah.
They'd gone from North Carolina down there to take part in it, and they were under the idea that this was all a big boast. I just recently read a book about I think it was a man named General Krulak who earned the Congressional Medal on Tarawa, and went to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and said, all right, this pinprick, this dime-sized thing on this map of Cuba is what we took in 3 days in Tarawa, and it cost us so many thousands, hundreds of lives. you guys better think twice before you go in there and think you're just going to take over Cuba. And that's the kind of like feeling I got from interviewing people who were involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, is that they never really thought they were going to invade Cuba, even though it was 98 miles away from Key West.
Well, down there, I flew in and out of Guantanamo quite often, and I was on a ship that was down there quite often. And the Cubans came through the gate, and nobody really had any fear of anything escalating, I don't think. They were cautious.
So even during the crisis, the basic Guantanamo, the people that were there, do you think they were?
I think they had some concern.
No.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Is there anything else you'd like to share with?
No, you mentioned any admirals or something that were people who were noteworthy or affected me. When I was in I had an anti-submarine warfare analyst job in the Pentagon, and our boss for that group of people was a highly decorated fighter pilot. And the story was one time when he was coming in to land and his carrier was being attacked by Japanese aircraft, and he shot down 5 aircraft as he was getting ready to land, took an extra circle around the carrier. And he was just a nice, quiet guy, and just the opportunity presented itself, and he was capable of taking care of it. But he was a neat guy to work for.
I got one more question. During the Cold War, was there fear of that escalating too? Is anybody worried that would turn into a full-out war?
Yes, because unless the Soviets pulled back, they expected them to do other things. How much, I don't know. But we put a lot of effort to that, and enough effort that the Soviets backed off.
I know my generation, I myself barely know even why the Cold War started.
Well,
what that conflict was about.
We certainly had a lot of people involved. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Stone, if there's anything else you'd like to share with us?
No, I guess that's about it.
Okay, great. Well, we appreciate you coming by.